introductions for the three of us that will be doing the presentation this morning, and then I'll sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to cover, and we'll get to it. But I think the way that we work, don't hold your questions to the end. If we are touching on something that you want some clarity on or something, just feel free to throw your hand up or bark out some comments or questions. We're happy to make this interactive. I think it works really well, especially in a little room like this. So just putting that out there. I'm Travis Farral. I'm the Director of Security Strategy with Anomali, and I'll pass it over to my colleagues and let them introduce themselves.
Good morning. I'm Mike Anderson, and I do partnerships. I'm over at Intel 471. I'm a CTI operator by trade. Spent some time in different F100 companies and cut my teeth on the Intel side on the government. I was a special agent with OSI. It's similar to NCIS, but we didn't have a television show.
Still don't.
Yeah, still don't. But nevertheless, using that methodology from the government side and the different teams that I was part of or helped build has led me to this moment in my life with Travis and Charissa.
So that leaves me. I'm Charissa Hightower. I'm the consulting services manager for Anomali. I go in and build Intel programs based on best practices in the industry, but also, of course, I work for Anomali, so we insert threat stream where we can. But my background is very similar to Mike's. I'm ex-Navy, though, cryptologist. Spent my entire career at NSA, and I've only been in the private sector for about 2 years. So that's definitely where I get my mindset and methodology too. And so you'll probably notice that through this talk. But it's good to have you guys this morning. Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. So we're talking about CTI metrics. This is not necessarily a sexy topic, really, but I think it's a much needed topic and something that we should all be trying to think about. Hopefully this opens up a broader discussion in our community, in the threat intelligence community. And, I'd love to hear, someone else's take on, how they're approaching metrics in their organization at some other conference or something. What I want to do, though, is I want to kind of lay the framework for what the expectation should be for this talk. What we're not going to be doing is giving you a checklist of this is how you do metrics in your organization. Instead, what we're going to be doing is covering the concepts behind doing metrics and how metrics should work around threat intelligence and basically empower you to go back to your organization and be able to get to have some tangible ideas about where you could get metrics that work for you, for your organization. So we're going to cover a number of things, assuming that, instead of just assuming everybody's super threat intelligence, been doing it for 20 years, we're going to cover some basic concepts to make sure we're all on the same page. We're basically the idea behind doing metrics in threat intelligence is treating it just exactly like an Intel problem. You have requirements that you're trying to meet for your metrics. You basically develop your collections, like what information do I need to collect to be able to create metrics or to address that requirement, and just flow through the rest of the lifecycle. That's basically how you can do metrics, and we'll go into all those concepts and cover all that to make sure everybody understands. But again, feel free to throw your hand up if you have any questions. We'll try to give some examples so that the concepts become a little more tangible to you and practical, and basically at the end you'll be able to see that there is some business value that can be derived from being able to measure this stuff. So that's really the intent behind this. Yeah.
Is this working? Okay, good. All right, so my wife says that I approach my speaking when I'm out and about as a TV evangelist, which means I may end up in the back of the room. I have not left, but I'm very passionate about the topics that I like to get up and talk about. I'm passionate because as a CTI practitioner, what we want to be able to do is to, as Travis noted, show value, demonstrate that value. And this slide I like. It's my second favorite one. And the reason why, get back here so I can see, the reason why it's the second favorite one is because there is one more that is my favorite that's in this one. And we're obviously using the Ghostbuster theme. And the very top up there where it says the WTF, just for the record, that means basically what Travis Farral is a metric and why do I care. I want to make sure that acronym is well known. But nevertheless, it really is a representation of the challenges that we face when we're dealing with metrics. I mean, I'm sure most of you in the room have some sense of an understanding of the value of a metric, right? It's a standard of measuring something, and that's the premise that we're operating off of as well. Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to show value behind what we do, especially oftentimes the CTI program is seen as a cost center, and it's not necessarily, showing that value beyond just the bean counting. So how can we take, that data set and demonstrate that value? And we can do it in a lot of different ways. So mapping it back to that philosophy, as Travis mentioned, is going to be important. So it is a challenge, as you can see on the screen, right? How do we wrangle it? How do we harness that capability beyond just counting those beans? And of course, the Stay Puft Marshmallow in the background is no different than anybody else in here has, and that's some sense of leadership that is trying to, let's show me the value. What are we doing? How is this program driving out the security decisions that need to be made at the end of the day? Because if we can't measure something, it makes it challenging to understand it. And if we don't have that knowledge, then we're not necessarily able to demonstrate that value, right? So from a proactive perspective, using the metrics to drive different decisions is kind of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, so still setting the stage for what we're going to talk about. Before we start diving into a ton of metrics examples, we wanted to really start off basic. So most of you, especially if you're an analyst, have seen the Intel cycle, right? I mean, this is ingrained into me 16 years ago. This is what I followed in my entire career. But what I will say is that in all the pictures I've seen about it or documentation, one thing you usually don't see on this is the feedback. We have this up on this slide because we really need to focus on that for a second, because this is the last and vital step of the intelligence cycle. And if you don't have feedback within your organization and within your teams, you don't even have the data to start metrics, right? I mean, this is what drives you forward every day operationally, and this is what's going to drive your metrics as well. And this is being a consultant and going into our clients, and from leading my own CTI team, this is the biggest challenge that I have seen in any environment. So, and to give you, I like to give real world examples. So maybe 5 years ago, I was put in charge as the lead analyst for working in nuclear procurement agents. So in that job, I came in, and this is no different than, put this to cyber, this is no different. So when I came in, I didn't know crap about what components it took to make a nuclear weapon. I didn't know what all my consumers were. Your consumers are SOC, they're IR. My consumers were FBI, Treasury, CIA, folks like that. And every day I put out a report, I got different feedback from each consumer about details that they needed to see to make my report actionable for them. And that was a really good experience for me as an Intel analyst, because a year later, after us collaborating like that, and it is rare even in the Intel community at a 3-letter agency, this is still a struggle. We were a high priority target though. We worked together every day. We collaborated every day. And at the end of that year, this guy's no longer in business. So, just to kind of give you guys a real life example of how effective and how needed that feedback is, because we would have gotten nowhere without it. Okay, so with that in mind, so we're going to approach metrics just like we do any other Intel problem. We're still going to use this Intel cycle, but we're just going to flip it. We're going to reverse it. We're still asking questions. We're analysts. This is what we do. We're still asking questions on a daily basis. And I wanted to put this up here because, just to give you an example, if I just reverse this one step to production, this is your reporting, right? This is your dissemination. So if I put this back one step, I'm going to be able, if I'm getting feedback from my teams like I was just talking about, and we switch this over to SOC and IR, now I'm going to be able to see, did I get my report to them on time? Were they able to action it? Did I put the detail needed in for a SOC analyst to go in and sweep the environment for additional IOCs? Did I give enough context then? Did the SOC and my CTI team give enough context to IR for them to be able to go in and clean it up? So these are questions that it's the same approach, right? Same methodology. You're just reversing it and going back. And this is how we're going to start to drive metrics.
Hey, really quick, how many of you use or understand the Intel cycle in its very second nature to you guys? If you don't mind, show of hands. Okay.
That's good.
Intel requirements, do you guys operate or leverage those, or at least have an understanding of what we mean?
Right.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah, that's actually good for us to understand who we're talking to here. I think one of the challenges that we all have that work in threat intelligence is that, we work for, in the commercial setting, we work for companies that they're not in business to just create intelligence, really, unless you work for Intel 471, Diamond sponsor, by the way, or Flashpoint or something. But most of us I came from ExxonMobil, running the threat intel team there. They're obviously not interested in producing intelligence, so management there obviously they don't know anything about requirements. They don't know anything about the life cycle. All they see is this cost, like these tools are expensive, the analysts are expensive, good ones are very expensive, and they're hard to find. And so being able to justify value back to them, I think, is very important for all of us, which is, why we felt very passionate about putting this together. But fundamentally, the real question is, how valuable is this? Even we want to know, like when I go through all the trouble putting a report together, I want to know that whoever's receiving that is actually reading it and getting value from it, making decisions, taking actions based on the information that I'm giving them, right? And so this goes back to the feedback question. If I'm not getting feedback on that, how can I possibly answer that question? So this then becomes on me to go back and try to get feedback, even if I have to pull it out of people, so that I can understand how I can better serve them. So here's some things, though, that start to get into a little bit of metrics. We've got some ideas up there. What things were put together what sources were used, what collections were used for me to produce that intelligence. We pay for some of these things, and knowing that at the end of the month, like I paid X number of dollars for this tool, and it looks like I used it one time for one report this month. Well, if that report was super important for the business, and they made some big executive decision on the board level as a result, that may be totally cool. But if it went to the SOC and they may or may not have taken action on it, after some time, it may be obvious that tool or that piece of collection is no longer necessary. But being able to have those insights into where you're getting your data from, how you're producing these things is exactly what we're talking about in terms of metrics. So the resources, being able to measure the impact. So if I produce something, it goes to the SOC or it goes to the IR team, what actions were they able to take as a result of that? Did it speed their efficiency? Was instant response now able to make faster decisions, operate faster on their feet, and be able to, shave maybe a day or a certain number of man hours off of their response as a result of the information I gave them about that threat? Being able, you pretty much have to go back and beat that out of them, because they're not necessarily going to volunteer that back to you. But if you can set up processes where they're automatically giving that back. Maybe your ticketing system or whatever system that they're using to capture the instant response team's activity is maybe a way to collect that automatically, right? So this goes back to the collections piece of the intelligence lifecycle. So, just consider all of the different types of intelligence that your team produces or that you produce, operational, strategic, tactical, whatever that is. Consider all the components that go into those things, all of the various, costs, how much of those things being used, how effective are they, and how is the resulting intelligence being utilized in the environment. That's really kind of an overarching view of what we're trying to convey here. So that's pretty much the end of this. But any questions on any of that before we move on? I just want to make sure those concepts are.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to give an example of operational metrics?
Yes.
Yeah, we actually have some examples later that should answer that. But if we don't cover what you're what your expectation is around that when we get to the examples later, feel free to throw that back out there and we'll try to work through it. Thank you. Anything else? Okay.
So from a strategic footprint, I mean, maturity, the scalability of an organization, a team, how many of you in here do produce what you would consider strategic intel? Okay, good. Right on. Okay. That's always good to see. It goes back to the resource management aspect, which is why I was asking. Okay, this is, again, methodology. Just to remind you guys, as Travis had mentioned, it is the premise of the mindset, right? The methodology behind why you need metrics and giving examples of that when we get to it. Driving that mindset is important, and this kind of speaks to it. I like this slide because, and I'll anchor back to what Charissa was pointing out in the Intel lifecycle itself and reversing it, but no different than Alice and the Cheshire Cat. If you don't know where you're going to go with your Intel program and not having things to measure, then just like Alice, you'll end up somewhere, right? You'll be down the road with your program, it'll be reactive, and you don't have that guidance. So that's why I asked the question about Intel requirements, because if you're setting that operational environment for your team, for that function, and you have a direction, a strategy to go, then you're able to capture those metrics along the way. And being able to capture those metrics, you'll be able to guide your team to where you ultimately want to be for the organization. So I like this slide because it kind of represents that mindset, that philosophy behind being able to implement that CTI program where you want to go the direction. Now, naturally, things are going to happen in any organization, in any CTI team where you didn't expect it, right? I mean, there's so many different events that occur that will, drive you left or right, but having those resources to expend on it is what I'm going to talk about here in a second. This is not my first favorite image, but again, keeping with the theme. So the question up there, going back to what Charissa had mentioned, is if we attack the metric problem the same way that we would an Intel requirement, an Intel question, and in this case, what is the capability and capacity for collections regarding weaponization of CVEs, common vulnerability, right? I'm sure most of folks in here have a focus in on CVEs, the weaponization of them. Okay. Looking at the question itself, and keeping in mind, most of you in here know what I mean when I say an Intel requirement or an Intel question, that's kind of the way we're doing it here from a grander scale, the framework. But two things that we really call out here, and I learned quite quickly on the government side, we have to justify our program, we have to justify our hires, our tools, et cetera. So one of the ways that, I hope that you walk away from today with and go back and say, okay, I'm not tracking my capability and I'm not tracking my capacity. And ultimately, that means what is my utilization as the organization? Because at the end of the day, a business is in business most times to be profitable, to make money. So we have to approach that mindset, that framework, the same way. So as Travis had noted, when you look at that question, two things to break down, the first one being capability. If my leadership is asking questions around CVEs, maybe that specific Intel requirement that I've built is going to be around plant and manufacturing in Asia Pacific. So specifically in that space, I need to be able to task my assets, my sources, to be able to answer that question, meaning what is our exposure rate to, let's say 15 different CVEs that's presented to us. So now I have to turn and look, okay, do I have the ability to answer this question? And if I attack it the same way that Chris is mentioning, looking at it also from an Intel requirement or attacking it from an Intel question, then I can begin to go through that process just in the collection phase, just in that step. This can be applied to production analysis, et cetera. So looking at it from a capability, do I have the ability to do it? Can I answer these questions about these CVEs? Well, if I don't know where I'm going, I don't know my operational environment, meaning do I even need to worry about these CVEs, right? Do we even have the attack surface? Are we even vulnerable to if something was to be weaponized and exploited? I need to understand that. So internal data is huge. What is my attack surface? That's going to allow me then to say, okay, I do care about, all of those 20 or maybe just 16 of them. And then I began to focus on those 16. But if I don't have, for instance, let's look at the different vendors, the industry information, government information, maybe I have an indigenous capability. But if I know as a CTI practitioner that I have to have a specific skill set within, and yes, I'm going to talk about the cyber criminal underground because it's relative here. That is a resource or a source of information that I can leverage. If I don't necessarily have that insight into, are these CVEs being productized, or threat actors, taking them and saying, yes, we can use this, from a marketplace perspective, I can make money off of this, and now I'm going to weaponize it, and then I'm going to use it. Meaning, where do I need to put my focus? So if I don't have the visibility, then that's going to be a gap, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be only cyber criminal cyber criminal intelligence. My point is, when we're looking at the ability to do our job in the collection stage, understanding that, I have a gap. Or maybe I don't, maybe I can answer the question completely, which is great, because then I can go back and validate, as Travis had noted, the type of sources, the vendors, my relationships, whether it's with the government or specifically having that capability on staff to say, you know what, Cindy is a Chinese linguist. She was able to help us focus in Asia Pacific. I can wrap man hours around the work that she did to answer that specific intel question and then associate dollars to that. And at the end of the month or quarterly or whatever, I'm able to say, yes, I have the ability to answer this question because you guys allowed us to have the assets to task to do that. Or I don't have it, and I have to be able to go back to leadership and say, I can answer 80% of your question. And if you want me to answer the other 20, then these are the things I'm going to need. So understanding our capability, our ability to do it, is a huge aspect of the collection step when we reverse it. And we could do this again with all the steps, but we only have 40 minutes, and I'm passionate, and I'll keep talking. But when we look at, and I'm going to talk about measurable impacts too, the capacity, the time to do it. So let's say that we don't necessarily know exactly what our CISO wants. She's given us some hints around it, right? It's hard to sit her down and talk to her about what is her intel requirements, what's her focus. But we do know she cares about vulnerabilities. And now I need to be able to go back to my leadership, not only and answer the ability, but the capacity to do it, the time to do it. So if I know that that's a prioritization for her, my CISO, my leadership, then I can demonstrate that, yes, we have 3 analysts. Here's everything that we're focused on. It takes, the 3 analysts that we have, 40 hours a week, 120. Numbers give me heart palpitations. So anyways, we have the hours, but if something new comes out, a new CVE, right, that pops, or there's a cyber attack, a ransomware event that occurs, I've got to be able to demonstrate that capacity week over week, month over month, because they don't understand from an operational perspective everything that we're doing. So for me to justify a new hire, again, a metric for our CTI team beyond just counting reports, if I'm tracking my utilization, then I'm able to demonstrate the value of our ability and our capacity, the time to do it. It's huge. Because, again, you may get 6 things, 7 things shoved your way. And if you don't have the data, the metrics behind it to demonstrate, yes, I'm answering it, I either need to reprioritize what I'm doing on a daily basis to answer these intel requirements, or we need to outsource, we need to hire, we need to be able to partner. We've got to be able to demonstrate that. If we're not able to demonstrate that, we're always going to feel like we're in a reactive mode. So capability and capacity. So let's look at what are the measurable impacts that can be measured, if you will, or captured. I've given you a few of those. I really believe tracking the hours and where they're being spent, almost running your CTI team almost like a little small business, right? You have your briefings, you have your outreach, you have your relationships, your reporting. So track all of that and the capability. But then use that data, use that information, and go over to the red team, for instance, and say, okay, I have a gap. I know that the CVEs are important, the weaponization of them. I don't have the intel, which ultimately means I can assess with some sense of confidence that if we are impacted by a cyber criminal, financially motivated, that hits our organization, the likelihood is going to be big. But I don't know what's going to happen. So take that gap from a capability perspective, run through it with a pen tester or your red team, and walk through it. This was to happen, exploit it. What assets are going to be exploitable? What data is on there? How long will it take us to repair that, right, from a remediation? The data loss, how much would that be? The impact from a brand and reputation. Capture all that stuff and then be able to go back and just simply say, not say, we don't have, I need a new vendor. We don't have the people on staff. Also say, which will likely result in this. And we've proven it with the experts that you hire that I work with. So is this a risk decision that we're willing to accept? And if so, great. And you can move on and answer 80% of the question. But at least you have the metrics to back up, the decisions that are being made, not only within the organization to help influence and drive those, but also within your team too. And that's huge because, again, at the end of the day, if I can't demonstrate my capability and capacity in a manner in which allows the team to do its job, but do it effectively, it's going to be very challenging, right? It will end up like Alice, like I said, down the road. I'm going to stop there. Do you have any questions on that, or can I, dive any further, any deeper? You guys already know I'm passionate, so I'll keep going.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to get into basically just walk through an example that may or may not happen in a typical organization, but hopefully there's enough here that resonates with you that you can apply this to your environment and hopefully make this a little more palpable to everybody here. So since we're talking about CVEs, we'll go with an example on that. I mean, it's something that a lot of us deal with in in our day jobs when we're working with companies and stuff. They're always concerned around this. So in this example, we find out through one of our sources, maybe Intel 471, that there is a brand new CVE that's actually being weaponized, and it's being offered for sale in the underground. And so, we, as part of our tasking, as part of our requirements, have to assess this to find out what the potential impact of this new CVE being offered and potentially encountered by our organization, what that would be. So we gather the information, we provide all the information that we have available to the SOC so we can generate alerts on this CVE. We can, elevate, maybe they already have detections available for it, but they didn't know the priority before because they didn't know it was being used, potentially in the wild, but now we can give them that information. And, so now they, vulnerability management's now got it. They can now assess which assets in the environment are vulnerable to this. You can set priorities for patching, perhaps, and things like that. We end up with, some detections, maybe in our IDS, IPS, next-gen firewall, whatever, where the, attempted use of these CVEs was being, seen on the perimeter or something. The investigations that led from those detections to 4 confirmed infections, that had, somehow got passed before we were able to get, all of the things spooled up like patching and stuff to prevent these. And, they were able to, take that information, escalate the patching even further, and protect the environment for the CVE. So this is like, basic workflow of things that might happen in an organization, because there's always that lag, when the CVE becomes known, to the CVE being weaponized, to you having, patched your environment against it. But then being able to apply intelligence into that equation is something that a lot of us end up dealing with along the way, and this is kind of maybe a somewhat typical example of how things may go, but in this there's ways to measure impacts along the way here in terms of hey, we started this discussion, from an intel perspective. We're the ones that found out the information that this was going to be weaponized before it was weaponized, hopefully, and before it was actually seen in our environment. So now we have an opportunity to go gather some metrics on this particular example and give that back to management and say, look, this could have been a lot worse, but because we were able to get this information into the right hands, we were able to, take some actions and, hopefully help save the company from something that could have been much worse, right?
So, can you give an example of a CVE example? Are you talking about internal and external, or specifically just internal?
Well,
in a company, you're dealing with external issues, and always dealing with both internal and external.
So
not internal within the company, that could be an internal company issue relative to nobody even knowing what the effects would be on the external level, but generally most businesses have to do things inside and out. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts or opinion is.
So sorry. So I follow what you're saying. For this demonstration, relative to internal and external, but as it relates to a CVE that now is being weaponized and used in attacks, how will that impact the organization? From a workflow perspective. So we're just saying that aspect of looking at a CVE being weaponized and then walking it through, how would that impact the organization?
Can you give an example of a CVE example at all, or like maybe an example of a fantasy example?
Flash exploit.
Okay, yeah. Give them like a flash. Really.
Yeah. So you know how it works. The Adobe will issue a patch for yet another flash bug or something. There'll be a CVE assigned to it. Not every time is there examples of that particular CV being used in the wild, right? So, it may end up being a low priority because nobody ends up using it, and so that just goes into the regular patch cycle and so on. But let's say in this example, like Adobe drops the patch on Tuesday, and like Wednesday evening we're getting chatter from the underground that they've got this available that could be added to exploit kits and utilized, right? So now we've got an issue like, okay, this just came out yesterday, there's no way we've already patched for it, but now we've got intel that tells us hey, we probably need to get on this. Let's first off, like, how fast can we detect on our perimeter any weaponization of this? Is there already a signature available for our next gen firewall or for our IPS environment? Yes, let's get those pushed out. How fast can we get the patch rolled out? Let's get those people involved. The vulnerability management team, how can we assess the potential impact to our user community internally? Do you have the detections in your vulnerability management platform to be able to do this? It's like a lot of simultaneous operational things that have to happen inside the organization, but it all starts with the intelligence that says, hey, this we're likely to see this being used against us. What all do we need to do to be able to react to that, basically?
So a good example of that is Hacking Team. I think it was 2015, 2016. The Hacking Team was hacked and breached, and they leaked. Was it? So an example was the Hacking Team breach, where Hacking Team had numerous 0 days for Adobe in the banking sector at the time. As the breaches rolled out, we were doing emergency 0 day patching based off of not only was it the proof of concepts out there, but the actual exploits, and we were seeing immediate adoption into crimeware and different things that were affecting the internet. So these are real experiences when it comes to large scale or offensive breaches that can be weaponized immediately.
Yeah, and thank you. And to add to that, right, the backdrop, the framework of what we're saying here relative to exactly what you're saying is, okay, once we've done all those things, let's capture what we did and, the cost avoidance of impact. Don't just leave it there, follow it as far down as you can. Did you see attempts 3 months later against something that we did patch where we saved the organization X amount of money, X amount of man hours? And that's the thing I think that's often lost on how, from a metric perspective, is being able to pull those numbers out. So
that's absolutely true. Yeah. Cause I know from my own experience, like we would go through stuff like this. Like we would tell them like, okay, this new Microsoft thing that came out last week, we're already seeing, signs that this is being used in the wild. So we need to have emergency patching, all this other stuff. We would go through all that and then we would be like, okay, that's done. Now we're on to the next thing. But we would forget to go through this process of actually measuring the impacts of what we did and being able to go back to management and say, because we were able to react so efficiently against this, we just saved the company X number of dollars, or we were able to maybe expose some gaps, as a result of this. Like we don't have a capability here that we probably need if we're going to be able to address these types of problems in the future. Or maybe we have process issues that need to be addressed, like we ran into a problem, like when we were trying to patch this, we didn't have, this system in place, and we need to maybe put some energy behind operationally how we can react to those things better in the future, But it all starts with being able to measure this stuff and be able to really sit down and think and apply analysis just like we would in any other metric or any other Intel problem to be able to, give valuable insights to management on how to move forward. So that's kind of the key here. So I'm going to hand it over to Charissa to walk through the feedback.
Yeah, we're getting close on time. I want to make sure I get through this. So I think hopefully this answers your question operationally too. I think this hits home to a lot more people. Obviously, great examples of metrics, things that you can do, the different ways you can look at it. But from what I see people kind of hit home most with them is your day-to-day operations, right? So up here, I got a few examples. So let's take your, let's assume everything's working, great. Everybody's giving feedback. You've got your CTI team that's sending the reports, different indicators compromised to your SOC team and then off to IR, right? So you can, at the end of the week or the end of the day, let's say my CTI team has sent 5 reports this week to the SOC. From those 5 reports, the SOC was able to identify 50 machines that were compromised and 50 additional IOCs related to that threat. Okay, great. Now they're going to create tickets. That's going to go off to IR. IR is now, because of that, being able to, find out, maybe some attribution. They've cleaned this many machines. They've had to reset this many passwords. And then you have, because numbers really tends to hit home, right? So then at the end of the week, you can go, okay, well, my report, because of CTI, resulted in this many additional IOCs, this many vulnerable machines, and IR did this to clean all of this up. So we have a hard number at the end of the week. And this isn't metrics related, but I've seen this do wonders for teams as far as, Intel can be a black hole, right? No one knows what they're doing and where that intel is going and how they affected anything. So this is really, I found, heading up a CTI team, my numbers at the end of the week and everybody seeing how they impacted the entire organization was great. And it also speaks a lot to the value of your team and the different tools you're using to your C-level. So next slide.
And something I'll add really quick, if I may, that Chris and I have done. We know the challenges, right? Oh, yeah, you can get all this data. It's so easy, Mike. Just go and get it. And then it is hard. But something that Chris and I have done in the past is actually use these metrics and share them with incident response. Allow them to benefit from that capability, right? That way, it's just not self-serving. You're saying, hey, I need these feedback so I can demonstrate X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by not the unrelated metrics question about like bringing the team together, because we faced this, like I said in the very beginning, feedback is the hardest damn thing you will do. And to get people on the same page, to get people to want to work together, I mean, it sounds like, hey, we should be doing this, but it's not that easy. So when I started, I had 10 SOCs globally. I had a lot of things to a lot of people to catch up with. So when I did a bi-weekly meeting and I started throwing these numbers out to everybody, we were like, oh, holy crap, we're actually we're catching threats. So like we're actually, mitigating something and preventing things. So that was great. And of course, management was even happier because they're like, they've given me X amount of dollars for whatever tool or whatever people that I wanted to bring on board. So And this is the reason for this slide is we talk about management being, we talk about numbers being important. Well, it's even more important to C-level, right? They want to be able to see where their dollars are going, and if you're actually producing. So if we get down to, if we want to take a specific threat, let's, WannaCry, NotPetya, anything like that, and we go back and talk about, well, we found this in our environment. We found this many machines compromised because of this threat, and we were able to clean this up. It's not that, it takes a little bit of effort, but it's not that hard to then dig deeper and go, well, if we would have had this many machines compromised by that threat, then how many millions of dollars did we just save you? Then you start talking, right? You start talking numbers to your team, and you're also talking numbers to C-level, which gets, and I know you guys can add even more on the profitability thing.
Yeah, it maps back to profitability, right? At the end of the day, that's the terminology we have to be able to speak in. And so one more step, and we can get there. Two more steps. Yeah,
it's like we got to talk two different numbers, right? We got to talk numbers to our teams, for ourselves, right? And tracking threats and knowing what we're doing and knowing what kind of impact we're making in our organization. But we also got to talk numbers to C-level. And that means a different number, dollar signs. So, this is, I think, and that's why I think this hits home the fastest to most teams, because this is the space that you're in every single day. And this is a really quick way to show value and to show, well, we can get metrics. This is what we produced this week. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No. You want to? The last slide here really is kind of echoes those things that we were talking about, and I'll turn it over to Travis here in a second before we get to our favorite slide. But it is the methodology. I hope we've given some examples of that. But this methodology is what is the value of Intel? We can wrap numbers around it, great. If we can wrap dollars and cents around it, man hours, these type of things, using the vulnerability workflow, the CVE, there's a lot of different directions that we can go with that, and the applicability, for instance, of capability and capacity in the collection step. When we reverse it, then do we have our right Intel requirements? Going after the feedback to allow us to understand our production. So it really is attacking it in the same methodology that you would. So this kind of accentuates that, right? What am I securing and protecting? It really does come down ultimately to business continuity, resiliency, profitability. If we can map everything that we do, then it truly does become value driven. And sometimes I get it, that is challenging, but hopefully as it relates to the workflow that we've kind of walked through, you can take that back and attack each of those steps within the cycle. So I love, the last comment being those that you wrap value around. And in each organization, that value may be a little bit different. It may be sustainability of a project. It may be critical assets. It may be new, a new footprint that you may be standing up, plant and manufacturer. Using something to drive that value. What is that value to your organization, your CISO, et cetera? It may be a little bit different, but the methodology, is ultimately the same.
Yeah, and it's, it comes down to treating it just like Intel. Like, if I want to measure this, I know that I'm able to deliver this intelligence. I have all the collections and everything, and I'm meeting my requirements, all that stuff. But then when I want to measure it, now I may have to do it's a collections problem again, right? It's what do I need to gather information on, like SOC tickets, operational things that happened, like specific IOCs that were applied in different environments. What happened as a result of those IOCs? Can I get information from the operational team to find out what was blocked, since that was put in, that was dropped in on the 17th, how many blocks were there between there and the end of the month, because that might be information, data that I can come back, analyze, and try to apply some numbers to say this was an actual real world impact to this organization. And even back to dollars and cents, like if all of those could have been infections that we were able to help impact, then that's value that we can show. Yeah,
like I said, the last example is an easy win. You guys are performing threat research and production on an everyday basis. So if you look at it from the very basics like that, what you've done that day, you can immediately show value. And then all these other examples that we've shown you, then you can dig deeper, and you can start, just like Travis and Mike were saying, then you can start to dig deeper and put numbers and dollar signs and hey, is a source valuable to us or not? Because those are all things that are going to derive from that very basic step, really.
And that's our favorite one.
So
My hands got smaller. I don't know what happened.
little, yeah. Anyway, so hopefully this wasn't confusing. Hopefully the concepts that we're trying to convey to you around metrics. We think this is something that is very important for us as an industry, as practitioners in this space, and we really hope that people will continue to talk about metrics around CTI more, even though it's not a very sexy topic, but it is a very important topic, I think, for all of us.
But it's not as hard as everybody makes it.
Yeah, that's the point.
I mean, that's our view at least, right? Is that it's talked about a lot. How do we do it? How do we do it? Well, it's not as difficult as a lot of teams make it. So, if anything, hopefully you walked away today realizing that, like, hey, at least I can go back to my computer and have this mindset and get some value out of it.
We this is the first. I mean, obviously, we could talk a long time about this. We had to be very careful not to drill down super far into different areas. But we do have plans to continue this conversation in different blocks of, okay, Mike, collections. You kind of hit on capability, capacity. Can we build some playbooks out? Can we look at opportunities to develop that a little bit further? And that's where we're at right now. We've got a lot of good info. So I hope that next time you see us all three together, it may not be with this picture, that you'll check us out again. So we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment. I think we often get missed in talking about metrics, like some important KPIs. On your example of a workflow from Intel about CVE through impact, we get so wrapped around measuring the impact of the Intel, we don't think about the impact of our processes and our tools. If you threw each one of those dots as a date into a spreadsheet and you track and say, hey, look, we have to go over to vulnerability management, ask for this via email or a ticket, and wait 3 weeks. But we have a system where they upload all their scans to that we have read-only access to.
Yep.
We can actually do our own analysis without impacting that team and be able to help them rack and stack this stuff in 3 hours instead of 3 weeks as we're waiting for an email back that's low priority to them. You measuring those KPIs can actually really show value to what Threat Intel can do to help the CISO prioritize what his teams are doing.
Oh yeah, and that's what I said. It was so hard not to. It was so hard not to go like too in depth on certain things, because every single point that we made in here, you could exactly what you're saying. You can go that in depth with it. You can show value in really anything if you have that mindset. It's like I said, we want to go further into this. And we want to take every step of the Intel cycle and just really go more in depth, exactly like you're saying.
Yeah, that was a great point. Thank you. Yeah, we're good. You want to join us? You want to come up? Yeah.
I might.
Anyway.
So one of the, it was about talking about the feedback.
Yeah.
We've done something similar to that, and I'm curious, have you had the experience of getting the feedback back to you?
Oh yes.
Because the feedback back to you is not always sunshine and rainbows.
Right. No, yeah. Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, just getting it back to you in general. I mean, do you want the process for how would you do that, or?
Personally,
Yes.
actually give the stakeholders intel. So it causes the SOC to burn FTEs for that intel you give. So they can give you back a report that says, yes, you gave me 100. We worked on 100. Only 10 were valid. How do you deal with that?
I have experience in that, because a lot of times from a source management perspective, we may be leveraging intel to help answer that question, and that intel, through our due diligence, right, appears to be, with initial confidence, because we're still vetting them out, providing valuable information. And getting that feedback is tremendous value, because now it lets me, assess that either my process from a CTI team is broken, my source, maybe my requirements are off. So for me, I'm going to give positive feedback, because it's not always going to be.
We're not looking for, like you said, rainbows, and we want negative feedback as well. So if I send my SOC, 50 indicators or however many threats, and they get nothing back in our environment, okay, well, I need to refocus. I mean, negative feedback is just as important as positive. I need to refocus. I need to hone my collection.
What do you do with that information from a metric perspective?
Well, if it's feedback like we're not finding anything, we're not getting anything additionally, or we need more context, then that's where I'm talking. You hone your collection, right? You focus on something else, and maybe you come back to that, because it's not to say it's not there right when they sweep the logs today, but it might be a week from now. I mean, those are things that you can do. But when they come back to you and say, I've had 10 positive hits, then that's information that we were talking about is going to go to the IR, excuse me. They're going to clean that up, and then we're all going to use that together. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but at the same time, for me, to echo what she's saying, but the reverse of it allows me to demonstrate metrics to say, hey, working with the IRR, providing that type of information allowed me to have cost savings. I'm getting rid of a source, or I'm not wasting my hours here, and that resulted from the feedback loop that I have from your team that allowed me to make a value-driven decision internally to no longer use this resource, or no longer to focus collection in that area. So you still can capture metrics around that, and even attribute it to, say it's the SOC team or the hunt team that's providing that back. Absolutely, right? Maybe we need to retune Tanium to do something else because it's not doing, in a workflow process. So to echo what she's saying, but at the same time use those metrics to make risk decisions internally with the CTI team. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's another really good point, and hopefully we're able to give you something, basically that feedback. It's tough to measure, but you should be able to, like he was saying, figure out that we made some process improvements or made some decisions as a result of that feedback that led to this, or led to tuning so that a month later, we got different feedback. We got better feedback, and we're go back to management and say, this is what we did. This is what that resulted in. And hopefully there's some way to show, some kind of value, at least maybe in dollars and cents, perspective, the SOC burned this many hours because of those wasted, the 90, wasted, hours of effort or whatever, and now we've been able to lower that number. This last month, because of process improvements, they only had 10 or 15. So that's where the metrics part kind of comes in, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to be that guy to add to that. I was going to say those qualitative statements are important. Capture them in notepad, throw them into a slide if you do quarterly brief, and bring them back to the team and have a whiteboard session. Do we agree with the statement? How do we fix our product so they
awesome.
The statement again?
Awesome.
Everything has to be quantitative.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.